those of us who are a little more sophisticated know that that's not the case. And so similarly, the brain may very well be functioning that way. And just like if you break something in the phone, then it's not going to transmit completely accurately. And similarly, if you damage the brain, it's not going to transmit completely accurately. But that doesn't necessarily mean that whatever it used to do was the originally produced by the brain.
So, so the brain, you're saying the brain is maybe like a receiver, like
right.
a cell phone, and consciousness is out there. It's not originating from the brain, but the brain is something that catches consciousness somehow.
Yeah.
And if the brain is broken in some kind of accident or death, well, I shouldn't say death. If the brain is somehow, I don't know how it would break, but no longer functional, this would affect the consciousness that it's receiving.
Yeah. Well, and people do have brain injuries, and the part of the brain that's injured is going to be related to the kind of impairment. You know, if they get a bad injury to the back of the head, our visual center is back there, they might be blind. And if it's another part of the brain, they might be paralyzed or they might be deaf. And so there's definitely a correlation between, you know, different parts of the brain being responsible for receiving certain aspects of consciousness. But I use the word receiving rather than producing. So, yeah.
Well, it's very interesting because what you're saying kind of is something that defies everything that I learned in school about biology, physiology, you know, synapses, dendrites, all of these little pieces of the brain and how it works. And it sounds almost like what you are talking about. It seems to fit more into other paradigms rather than our current scientific paradigm. It sounds almost like maybe Aborigines might discuss dream time with their brain. Their consciousness goes to some other place, or maybe Native American Indians have visions of flying, or becoming an animal and running through the forest, that sort of thing. And I'm curious, what your findings mean. What they mean. Does this mean that we can exist outside of the body? And where does that take us?
Yeah, here again, from a purely scientific perspective, NDEs point to that possibility, but they alone can't. From a purely scientific perspective, we can't conclude that. But the way that the professional literature seems to be going these days is to take evidence from a variety of phenomena where the evidence seems to converge and point to this conclusion with greater support. So, for example, there's the phenomenon of after-death communication, where people have the experience of communicating with deceased loved ones, and there are mediumistic experiences. And there are cases of these kind of experiences that have veridical elements as well, where it seems as if a deceased entity continues to function with intentionality and the capacity to communicate, although its communication isn't through language in these states. It seems to be more sort of mind to mind. And deathbed visions, which also have been studied fairly extensively, where people seem to, in the last moments of life, perceive usually deceased loved ones who are there apparently to help the person through the transition from physical to non-physical existence, that the evidence is rather consistent in pointing to the survival of consciousness and people after physical life.
Well, this opens up a door to all kinds of things, then, doesn't it? If we can believe that consciousness can survive the body, we sort of have this disembodied consciousness that can go places. It's no longer limited by the body. My question to you is then, does that open up the possibility that a lot of these other things that some people can't believe in, is it possible that they are real? For example, a clairvoyance and precognition, seeing the future. Could someone leave their body and see what's happening on the other side of the planet, not just on top of a locker in a hospital room, but could you go to some other place or time and have visions? Is that in my opinion, as soon as you leave the body, I guess I don't know where we can draw the line. What kind of door have we opened here when we talk about consciousness existing outside of the body?
Well, we're getting into an area where I don't have as much expertise as I do specifically about NDEs, and there's a lot about them we haven't even touched on yet. But to answer your question, there is research on phenomena like remote viewing, where people seem to be able to clairvoyantly perceive scenes and objects and happenings in remote locations that they have never been to physically, and that turn out to be accurate. And there seem to be even some people who seem to be quite talented in the ability to do this. So all of this is pointing to the possibility that consciousness is non-local, meaning that it isn't limited to just the local area where the individual is, but that it really has the capacity to perceive, at least in quite remote areas or distant locations, and so it's very possible that consciousness is much more has much more potential than we have developed, and that there may be ways to develop these abilities that what near-death experiencers say is that if one were to develop these abilities, the purpose isn't to do it just for its own sake, but that what people, I guess, learn from near-death experiences, one of the things that a lot of near-death experiencers say is that they learn in the experience that consciousness is so much more than, and the cosmos is so much more than most of us have been led to believe in our Western culture, but that beyond that, that everything is connected to everything else. And
so these are NDEers, the message that they're bringing back after their experience.
Right.
Okay.
And that perhaps, as one NDEer said, perhaps love is all that really matters. So to cultivate consciousness in this way is not just an end in itself. It's not about having really cool powers. It's about discovering the interconnectedness of everything and the absolute importance of living our lives with love and the intention to be loving.
So this is the message that most of them bring back.
Right.
That love is very important. We really are here to love each other.
Mhm. Yes, that's right. And
that's a wonderful message.
Yeah, it is a wonderful message, and essentially NDEers and I haven't gone into very much exactly why they come back with this, but very often, not always, in fact, not even in a majority of cases, but very often NDEers will say that they entered a realm in which they experienced an entity that was all-knowing and all-loving, and that more than anything fosters their coming back with the message about the importance of love. And they are convinced of the interconnectedness of things because, again, a minority, but a substantial minority of near-death experiencers during their experience have a life review in which they review and re-experience typically every moment of their life and experience being everyone who was ever on the receiving end of their actions. So that's the experiential base for believing, not believing, but knowing that we really are deeply connected, like intrinsically connected with everyone and everything else in a very ultimate way that we obviously are not usually aware of when we're in our own skin-encapsulated little egos.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is another area of, I've seen movies about what people have experienced on the other side and brought back, but are there any cases that you would like to talk about? Some visions of the other side? Is it a wonderful place? Is it what do people report?
Yeah.
After they've come back?
Certainly the majority of near-death experiences are pleasurable, and people do have experiences of other, when they leave the material domain and move into transmaterial domains, they often have joyful reunions with deceased loved ones. They see beautiful environments that have intense colors like they've never seen on Earth, and encounter spiritual entities, sometimes identifiable, sometimes not, that seem very intelligent and loving, and which is my definition of wisdom, is the combination of intelligence and love. And so their experiences definitely are very pleasurable. And it's in those experiences that they learn that every life has purpose, and that the purpose is to develop in our capacity to love and also to learn, to acquire knowledge. So loving and learning seem to be important. But
okay, that's a really important message, because I've spent most of my life asking why am I here?
Mm-hmm.
what is the point of all this?
Yeah.
And the message we're getting from NDEers, people who have temporarily checked out and come back, is that we are here to love and to learn.
Yes.
But for what purpose, I wonder? To improve maybe the next time around?
I think there's a sense that that living on Earth is an opportunity for a certain kind of experience that can help us advance in our psycho-spiritual development. But it might be more than that, because we're getting into the domain of things that it's not uncommon for NDEers to say, I knew things in the experience that I wasn't able to bring back with me. I know that I knew, but I can't tell you what it was that I knew. I just know that I knew a lot more than I could bring back and really be able to conceptualize with my human brain. And so the
experience was just beyond words, beyond
absolutely.
What they could explain.
That's right, and there's actually a word in the near-death literature for that ineffability, that I can hardly remember an NDEer telling me about their experience that they don't, someplace in the experience, just feel exasperated that there are no words to describe what they actually experienced. So, yeah.
Right. Well, I guess we kind of learned to describe our world, but how would you describe a place for which there are no words?
Exactly.
An experience like that.
And
well,
in which the ways of functioning that we're used to, like sequential time and only being able to see where our visual field and being, if you go up against a wall, you stop. In these experiences, none of those rules apply, and there's just a lot more that doesn't apply. I do want to say quickly, and because I know we need to be mindful of the time, that
well, okay, very quickly then, and we'll take a break right after this, please. Your quick point.
Okay, that a minority of people have experiences that are distressing, that are actually dominated by feelings of terror, profound isolation, sometimes even torment. But one of the things that research has shown is that although in the short term they differ from, the after effects differ from those of pleasurable NDEs. Pleasurable near-death experiencers lose their fear of death. They no longer believe that they'll survive physical death. They know from their own experience. And
okay. Well, Dr. Holden, let's take a break. Okay. Let's take a break right there. I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
We'll take a break. We'll leave them hanging for more right after this break. Everyone, you're listening to Inception Radio Network. This is Epic Voyages. I'm your host, Pat Uskert, talking to Dr. Jan Holden about NDEs. We'll take a little break for about 4 or 5 minutes and be right back. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Pat Uskert on Epic Voyages Radio, talking to Dr. Jan Holden about NDEs. And Jan, Dr. Holden, where did we leave off? I believe we were talking about the inability of these people to explain the amazing experience that they had. Mm-hmm. What else? Yeah. What else can we say about what they brought back with them?
Well, another aspect that I think is important that we had just started to touch on was distressing experiences, and how some people have experiences dominated by fear or isolation or even torment. And they're a minority of cases. And one of the things that research has, I'm going to drop back and give a kind of a bigger picture than where I was going. Of all the people who survive a close brush with death, about 1 out of 5 will report a near-death experience, and the other 4 out of 5 will not remember anything unusual. And research of all the things you can imagine, age and sex and sexual orientation and education level and pre-existing beliefs and affiliation with religion or non-affiliation, anything you can imagine has been researched to try to figure out what's the difference between the 4 out of 5 who remember nothing unusual and then the 1 out of 5 who remember this vivid, very unusual experience. And the short answer is we have no idea, or as I like to say, heaven only knows why that's the case. Then among the people who do have a near-death or report a near-death experience, the vast majority will report a pleasurable experience. A small minority, maybe 10%, will report a distressing experience. And there, too, we have research has identified no difference between them. A lot of people think maybe if you're a bad person, you have a bad experience, but there's absolutely no support for that from research.
Interesting, because you'd think if you were a bad person, I mean, the common thinking is that you go to some hellish, horrible place.
Yeah. And we have cases of people who've done some really nasty things in their lives, but sure, when they had a close brush with death, they had a pleasurable experience. And then people who, for as far as we can tell, did nothing unusually bad in their lives and had a distressing experience. The most that we can suspect is there's a little evidence that maybe the person's mindset at the time that they were in the close brush with death may have influenced, but even there, it's definitely not. You don't have to be in a negative state of mind to have a distressing experience, nor does being in a negative state of mind guarantee that you'll have a distressing experience. Maybe there's a little tendency, but that's all. And so there's some things that are still very much mysteries, and we can say that for sure everything that we've tried to pin it on just doesn't pan out in research.
Well, what does this mean then? That a person who's done bad things might go off and have a great near-death experience, and a decent person might have a dark near-death experience. What did they report coming back? Did the experience change the person? Did the bad person learn some kind of lesson? Or did these experiences change these people?
Yeah, absolutely. And the deeper the experience, every near-death experience is unique, but there are these underlying patterns. And if a person just has a quick out-of-body experience and then comes back in a few seconds, that's still a near-death experience. But a lot of people have very elaborate ones that have a lot of the features. And the deeper, the more features that the person has, the more they're likely to be changed afterwards. And people who have very elaborate experiences are just, there's the best word is to say that they've been transformed by the experience. And they're transformed psychologically. People tend to become less materialistic, more altruistic, less concerned about fame and fortune, and more concerned about the welfare of other people. And spiritually, people have an ongoing sense of connectedness to something higher. They may become, they typically become more spiritual, not necessarily more religious. And in fact, sometimes people move away from organized religion, but definitely become more spiritual and tend to have more psychic kinds of experiences, other paranormal or transpersonal experiences, even physical changes. People often report that they don't need as much sleep, that they're hypersensitive to medication, maybe have some food sensitivities that they didn't have before, and even a phenomenon called electromagnetic after effects, where electrical things in their vicinity malfunction at a much higher rate than other people. And this is something that's been corroborated by spouses and things like that, the person, light bulbs go off. A lot of near-death experiencers can't wear watches because the battery just dies after a couple of weeks, and they keep changing it, and finally they just give up. And then social changes, and like, for example, we know from research now, the research of one of my former doctoral students, now Dr. Roseanne Christian, that NDEers who are married at the time of their NDE have a much higher likelihood of getting divorced because they end up being a different person than the one who said I do, and the spouse's values converge and their lives diverge, and then their lives diverge. So there's a lot of after effects, and going back to the distressing experiences, eventually people who had distressing experiences show the same after effects as people who had pleasurable ones. Now, in the short run, the pleasurable NDEers have no fear of death. The distressing ones, understandably, are not anxious to go back there. But eventually NDEers tend to perceive that they had the experience they needed to sort of promote their psychospiritual development.
So they see the experience almost as a lesson. So it's a lesson definitely. To somehow come back and get their act together or improve somehow.
Yeah, and Another thing that's very common is that NDEers learn in their experiences. Sometimes they're actually told, in some cases people are told by Jesus, for example, that their lives have purpose and that they actually need to come back to physical existence to fulfill a purpose in their life. And sometimes they have a sense of what that purpose is, but more often they actually don't. And sometimes they actually feel kind of tormented by wondering, what are they supposed to be accomplishing? And but a definite sense that their lives have purpose. And that's why no matter how pleasurable the experience, NDEers have a tendency to have a lower likelihood of attempting suicide than just the general population, because they know that when we face trials and challenges in life, those are opportunities for us to learn, not something for us to run from. And so they have a sense of commitment to living life as much as they long for the often ecstatic experience that they had during the NDE, and they will be perfectly fine when it comes time for them to die. They also feel very committed that that's not to be hastened by their own actions.
Well, I guess, yes, what's the hurry? You will get there eventually.
Yes, well, yeah, there's some of that, and there's also, I often hear NDEers, especially those who had transmaterial aspects where there was, they were in the presence of an entity or a surroundings in which they felt absolutely known and absolutely loved, that a lot of people did not want to leave there, and in some cases were told that they had to come back, and they long to be back there at the same time that they know that they're here for a reason.
Well, I can't imagine an experience more profound than dying, leaving my body, coming to understand that I can exist outside my body, and then coming back. So understandably, these people are changed and have an amazing new perspective on the life itself, the lives that we're living. Dr. Holden, it's the top of the hour, and usually at this time we take questions from listeners, and you have a lot of questions coming at you.
Great.
So, are you ready to answer some questions?
I am.
Okay, great. Actually, before I get into a listener question, I would like you to just say something. This must have all of this that you've learned over the past few decades must have affected you spiritually or improved you spiritually. What might be your spiritual message to people, knowing now that you are convinced that we can exist outside the body, that our lives may in fact go on? What is the purpose of this life?
Well, as we've talked about a little bit earlier, NDEers say it's about loving and learning, and but I guess
should we be scared of death? I'm scared sometimes.
Yeah, well, NDEers are not.
They're not.
Particularly those who had pleasurable experiences, and even those who had distressing experiences usually eventually lose their fear of death. So if we're to believe NDEers, then